A rectangle of corrugated steel. No plumbing, no staff most days, no product to source, spoil, or restock. On paper, self-storage looks like the closest thing capitalism offers to a vending machine the size of a city block. Look at the numbers and the fantasy holds up. Some facilities post operating margins north of 50%. Compare that to a restaurant scraping by on 8. Compare it to a hotel fighting for 20. Here's the paradox. An industry built on empty space is one of the hardest businesses in America to fill, finance, and defend. The same emptiness that makes it cheap to run is what makes it brutal to own. Stick around because the gap between those two facts is where fortunes get made and where a lot of amateurs get quietly wiped out. Entry point 1, bootstrapped. A single-story facility in a secondary market, maybe 40,000 rentable square feet, converted from an old warehouse or built cheap on cheap land. Total cost to get in, including land, construction, and gates, somewhere between $1.2 and $2 million. Financed mostly through an SBA loan, a local bank, or a small syndicate of friends and family. The owner does the leasing. The owner drives out when the gate code fails. There's no property manager on salary, no regional director fielding complaints. Margin is real, but so is the labor nobody accounts for. And so is the risk that one bad winter or one competitor's grand opening 2 miles down the road quietly eats the whole plan. Entry point 2, mid-market. A multi-building, climate-controlled campus in a growing suburb, maybe 80 to 100,000 square feet, often with a retail storefront up front selling boxes and locks. Price tag, $8 to $15 million, usually built with a mix of construction debt and an equity partner who wants a piece of a stabilized asset. This is where third-party management companies get hired, where a regional operator starts running 5, 10, 15 sites off one spreadsheet, and where the first real conversations happen about refinancing at a lower cap rate once occupancy stabilizes above 85%. Entry point 3, institutional. This is where the public players live. Extra Space, Public Storage, CubeSmart, Life Storage before it got absorbed, portfolios worth hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, acquired in bulk, financed through REIT structures, refinanced through commercial mortgage-backed securities. At this level, you are not buying a building. You are buying a cash-flowing instrument that happens to have a roof, priced against a cap rate benchmark that moves with interest rates, bond yields, and whatever else Wall Street is worried about that quarter. 3 tiers. Same steel boxes, wildly different games. The bootstrapped owner is competing on hustle. The institutional owner is competing on cost of capital. Almost nobody in the middle tier realizes which fight they've actually wandered into until the refinance comes due. Here's the mechanism nobody advertises on the brochure. Self-storage does not make its real money on the rent it quotes you in month 1. It makes its money on what happens after you sign. Every unit gets rented at a promotional rate designed to look irresistible. Then, quietly, on a schedule the tenant rarely notices, the rate climbs. Operators call this revenue management. The same discipline airlines use to price a seat differently depending on who's buying and when. A facility can raise existing tenant rents 6, 8, sometimes 12% a year, because moving 40 boxes of Christmas decorations across town for a $20 savings is not worth anyone's Saturday. The industry tracks this obsessively through a number called same-store revenue growth, comparing rent collected at facilities that have been open for years, stripping out anything new. It is the single metric that tells Wall Street whether existing tenants are quietly being squeezed or whether the squeeze has stopped working. Here's the counterintuitive part. A facility can sit at 70% occupancy and still be more profitable than one sitting at 95. Full is not the goal. Optimized is the goal. An operator would rather hold 10 empty units back and charge everyone else more than fill every unit at a discount. Empty space in this business is not failure. Sometimes it's strategy. There's a second lever most tenants never think about. Ancillary revenue. Insurance or protection plans forced or upsold at move-in, tenant administration fees, late fees, retail sales of boxes and locks at the front counter. On their own, these look like rounding errors. Stacked across 1,000 units, they can add several percentage points straight to the bottom line, often at close to 100% margin, because none of it requires a single additional square foot of space. Walk the actual property and the design starts talking. Hallways are narrow, fluorescent lit, deliberately featureless, so nothing about the space invites you to linger, negotiate, or notice the rate on the wall. Unit doors are painted the same flat color from one end of the building to the other, so no unit looks more or less desirable than its neighbor, which quietly kills any tenant leverage to bargain. Climate-controlled interior units get built deeper inside the structure, away from windows and loading bays, marketed as protection for your belongings. The real function is architectural.
Interior units are the cheapest square footage to build and the easiest to upsell at a premium because a tenant standing in a hot parking lot in August will pay almost anything for air conditioning. The invisible liability sits underneath all of it. Every facility is one insurance claim, one burst pipe, one tenant storing something flammable in violation of the lease, away from a lawsuit that erases a year of profit. Owners carry tenant liability waivers and forced insurance add-ons specifically to firewall themselves from the one bad unit that could sink the whole balance sheet. There's a quieter liability too, one that never shows up on a rent roll. Roofs age. HVAC units in climate-controlled buildings fail in July, exactly when tenants notice. Asphalt in the drive lanes cracks under Texas heat or Midwest freeze-thaw cycles. None of this shows up in month-to-month cash flow. All of it shows up eventually in a capital expenditure bill that can wipe out a full year of the margin everyone was bragging about. Now, the part the brochure never mentions. 2 failures, both real, both instructive. The first is a story of leverage. In the run-up to 2008, U-Storage Trust, a publicly traded self-storage REIT, expanded aggressively using debt, betting that occupancy and rents would keep climbing indefinitely. When the financial crisis hit, occupancy softened at the same moment credit markets froze, and the company found itself unable to refinance maturing debt on reasonable terms. Its stock collapsed, its dividend was slashed, and the company was ultimately reorganized and rebranded as CubeSmart under new ownership. The lesson: a business with 50% margins can still die if the debt covering the other half of the equation comes due at the wrong moment in the credit cycle. The second is a story of oversupply. Through the mid-2010s, developers noticed the same 50% margins everyone else did, and cities like Houston got flooded with new self-storage construction, sometimes 3 or 4 competing facilities built within a mile of each other in the same submarket. By 2018, trade publications covering the industry were reporting occupancy and rate declines across major Texas markets as new supply outpaced demand, squeezing the very operators who had rushed in to chase the boom. No single company collapsed overnight in this case. Instead, dozens of smaller, newer facilities quietly bled for years, discounting rents just to stay above break-even in a market that had simply built too many boxes. Same industry, same math on paper, 2 completely different ways to lose. Strip away the gate codes and the drive-up units, and what's left is one equation. Rent collected minus debt service minus the slow bleed of vacancy and concessions equals whoever survives long enough to raise rates on tenants too inconvenienced to leave. Realistic stabilized net margins for a well-run facility land somewhere between 30 and 45%, among the highest of any real estate asset class, but only after the debt is sized correctly and the supply in that specific zip code hasn't already been overbuilt. Public Storage, founded in 1972 and still the largest operator in the country, built its empire less on flashy acquisitions and more on relentless operational discipline, extracting a few extra points of same-store revenue growth year after year, decade after decade, out of buildings that most people drive past without a second thought. This is not a business that rewards the person chasing the 50% margin they saw in someone else's pitch deck. It rewards the operator who already knows exactly how many empty units a submarket can absorb and prices everyone else's dream of easy money accordingly.